Imagine growing up in a house where every word you hear tells you you're worthless. Imagine running from that pain, only to find refuge in the home of a man so broken he no longer speaks. What happens when two wounded souls, one voiceless and one silenced, come together? This is not just a story, it's a journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Welcome to Folktales Hub. Please hit the subscribe button and share with friends and family. Have you ever seen a child look so broken, so unwanted, that you wonder how her heart is still beating? That was Amara. Her story didn't begin with smiles or love. It began in a small corner of Nairobi, where narrow alleys smell of dust, smoke, and roasted maize. Amara grew up in a house that did not feel like home. Her father, Joseph, once held her hand when she was small, but after her mother's death, his heart turned cold. He remarried, hoping for comfort, but instead brought in Ruth, a woman whose tongue was sharp, whose eyes carried fire, and whose heart seemed carved from stone. From the first day, Ruth looked at Amara like she was a burden. You eat too much. You talk too much. You walk like your mother. Every word was meant to crush her. And Joseph, he stayed silent. A father should shield his child, but Joseph had learned to protect his own peace instead. He let Ruth's words fall like stones on the young girl's shoulders. Soon, Amara became the house help in her own home, washing, scrubbing, cooking, and still hearing, "You're good for nothing." But the real pain wasn't in the chores. It was in the hunger for love. She wanted just one warm word, just one hug. But silence filled the spaces where kindness should have lived. The day everything changed began like any other. The sun was high, the market noisy. Hawkers shouted prices, goats bleated, and women bargained over tomatoes. Amara carried a basket heavier than her arms could handle. Her stepmother Ruth walked beside her, throwing insults loud enough for strangers to hear. "You are useless, Amara. Can't you walk faster? You think food will cook itself." People turned their heads. Some laughed, others shook their heads. But no one spoke up. In that market, humiliation was just another story to watch. The basket slipped from Amara's weak hands, spilling oranges across the dust. She bent quickly, tears burning her eyes as she tried to gather them. Ruth's hand rose, ready to strike her in front of everyone. That's when a voice cut through the noise. "Enough." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like a drumbeat in silence. The crowd turned. A man stood a few feet away. He wasn't dressed in wealth, just a plain shirt, faded jeans, and sandals. His face carried deep lines, and a thin scar crossed his cheek. His hands were rough, the kind only work could shape. This was David. He wasn't known for laughter or stories. People in the area called him the quiet one. Carpenter, some said. Farmer, others whispered. He lived alone on the edge of town, where maize fields met the forest. People gossiped about him, but no one really knew his life. And now, he stood between Ruth and the girl she was about to strike. "Leave her," David said again, his eyes locked on Ruth. Ruth's mouth opened, ready to spit fire. "And who are you to tell me how to discipline my child?" "She is not your child," David replied calmly. "She is your victim." The market went silent. Even the goats stopped bleating. Amara froze, staring at this stranger who dared to say what no one else ever had. Ruth laughed bitterly. "Are you going to buy her then? Take her if you think she's so precious." Her words were meant to sting, to humiliate. But David didn't flinch. He stepped forward, helped Amara to her feet, and placed the fallen oranges back in the basket. Then he turned to Ruth. "I won't give you money," he said, "because her worth is greater than coins. But if you don't want her, she leaves with me now." The crowd gasped. Ruth sputtered. Joseph, who had been standing silently in the corner like he always did, looked down at his shoes. He didn't speak. He never did. And that silence was enough. Amara's life changed in that instant. With shaking legs and eyes wide with fear, she followed the man out of the market. Not because she trusted him, but because behind her was nothing but chains. Ahead of her, maybe, just maybe, was freedom. David's home was not a palace. It was a small house made of stone and wood, sitting quietly at the edge of tall maize fields. Birds nested in the trees, and the air smelled of soil and rain. For a girl used to walls of anger, this silence felt heavy, almost frightening. He gave her a small room. A bed with a thin mattress. Blanket. A jug of water. It wasn't much, but to Amara it felt strange, like something too kind to be true. That night she didn't sleep. She sat on the bed, knees to her chest, wondering why this man had spoken for her. What did he want? What would it cost her? David, in his room, sat by a lamp, carving wood with a sharp knife. His hands moved steadily, creating shapes only he understood. He didn't know if bringing the girl here was wise. He only knew he couldn't watch her be broken any longer. Somewhere deep inside, his own scars echoed hers. The next morning, Amara rose early, afraid to be seen as lazy. She swept the yard, washed dishes, and cooked porridge. David said nothing, just nodded once and ate quietly. For days, silence became their language. She worked. He farmed and carved. They barely spoke more than a few words. But sometimes silence can be safer than cruelty. Slowly, Amara began to notice the small details. How David left extra bread on the table when he saw her hesitate to eat. How he placed an old blanket at her door on a cold night without saying a word. How he never raised his voice, never lifted a hand. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was dignity. And for Amara that was something new. Still, the world outside had its tongue. In the village, whispers grew. Why did David bring a strange girl to his house? Maybe she is his wife. No, she is too young. Then what does he want with her? Gossip, sharp as knives, traveled faster than wind. Amara heard some of it when she went to the well. Women would whisper loudly enough for her ears. She wanted to shrink into herself, to disappear. But David never explained himself to anyone. When people asked, he simply said, she needed a home. And that was the end of it. Yet inside Amara, fear still lived. Each night she wondered, when will he show his real face? When will the kindness end? She didn't know that David, in his own quiet way, was battling his own ghosts. The scar on his cheek wasn't just on his skin. He had once loved and lost, once trusted and been betrayed. Pain had taught him silence. Now, in the broken eyes of this girl, he saw a reflection of his own past. And so, their story began, not with laughter or promises, but with silence, wounds, and the faintest spark of something new. Something fragile. Something that might one day be called love. When Amara first came to David's home, the silence felt like a shield. It protected her from the cruel words she had always known. But as the weeks turned into months, that same silence began to feel like a wall. David was kind, yes. He never shouted. He never raised his hand. But he also never spoke about himself, never asked her what she carried in her heart. They lived like two shadows under one roof, near enough to see each other, far enough to never touch. Amara often wondered, why did he bring me here? What does he really want? The whispers from the village followed her like a trail of smoke. At the well, women would laugh under their breath. The girl is working as a maid in David's house. Others said worse. A man doesn't take in a girl for free. Sooner or later, he will claim his price. Amara carried those words like stones in her chest. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the day David would demand what everyone assumed. But that day never came. Instead, David lived as he always had. Early in the morning, he would rise and walk into the fields, his hoe resting on his shoulder. His back bent under the sun, sweat dripping from his forehead as he tilled the soil. Amara would watch from the window, then quietly prepare food, leaving it on the table for when he returned. He ate without complaint, thanked her with a simple nod, and carried on with his work. It was a simple rhythm, safe but heavy with unspoken words. One afternoon the rains poured heavily. The roof rattled, and the sky roared like an angry beast. Amara sat near the doorway, hugging her knees, watching the storm. For her, storms carried memories. The night her mother died, the rains had fallen just like this. She had been a small girl, hiding in the corner as neighbors whispered, "The child is now alone." Her chest tightened. Tears threatened to spill, but she bit her lip. She had learned long ago not to cry where others could see. But David's voice broke the storm. "Do you fear the rain?" he asked gently. Amara turned, startled. He was seated on his wooden stool, a piece of wood and knife in his hands. He was carving again, just as he always did when silence pressed too hard on him. "I don't fear it," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I just remember." David's eyes lingered on her face, searching, but he didn't press her. He simply placed the carving on the table. It was a small bird, wings open as if ready to fly. "For you," he said. Amara blinked, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. No one had ever given her a gift without asking something in return. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck. Instead, she held the wooden bird close, as if it could shield her from the world. That night, for the first time, she slept with a smile. But peace does not come without testing. Few weeks later, Amara fell sick. It began with a cough, then a fever that burned like fire. She tried to hide it, still cooking and cleaning, but her hands trembled and sweat drenched her clothes. One morning, she collapsed while carrying water. David rushed to her side, his scarred face etched with worry. Without a word, he carried her inside, laid her on the bed, and pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. For 3 days, he barely left her side. He fed her spoonfuls of broth, wiped her sweat, whispered words she barely heard in her fevered state. He who had always chosen silence now spoke softly, urging her to fight. "Stay, Amara. You are stronger than this. Don't let it take you." Through half-closed eyes, Amara saw something she had never seen before, tears in his eyes. And in that moment, a truth settled in her heart. David did not save her for what the village whispered. He saved her because he could not bear to see another soul break the way he once had. When her fever finally broke, and she opened her eyes to see him asleep in the chair beside her bed, her chest filled with something unfamiliar. Gratitude, safety, and maybe, just maybe, the first seed of love. As Amara regained her strength, she began to see the house differently. It was no longer just a shelter, it was a place where she could breathe. She filled the rooms with small touches, fresh flowers in a jar, neatly folded clothes, the smell of chapati wafting from the kitchen. She laughed softly to herself while cooking, surprising even her own ears with the sound. David noticed. He never said much, but one evening while watching her hum over the cooking fire, he murmured, "The house feels alive now." Amara's cheeks flushed. Maybe it was always alive. You just never looked. It was the first time she teased him. And though David didn't laugh, the corner of his lips curved, ever so slightly. But the outside world doesn't forgive happiness so easily. One morning Ruth, the stepmother who had cast Amara aside, appeared at David's gate. Her face was no longer proud. Her clothes hung loosely on her. Her eyes were tired. Misfortune had touched her house. Joseph had fallen ill, and the little money they had was gone. "You took her," Ruth said sharply, pointing at Amara. "And now you must return her. She belongs to her family." Amara froze, fear rushing back like a storm. For a moment, she was that small girl again, powerless under Ruth's glare. But David stepped forward. His voice was calm, but it carried steel. "No," he said firmly. "She does not belong to pain. She belongs to herself. And here she is free." Ruth sputtered, anger flashing. "People will talk. They already say." "Let them talk," David cut in. "Their tongues are not my master." For the first time, Amara saw Ruth silenced. She turned and left, muttering curses under her breath. When the gate closed, Amara looked at David with wide eyes. Her heart pounded. He hadn't just spoken for her. He had fought for her. And something inside her broke free. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why? Why do you care for me?" David's eyes softened. He hesitated, then said, "Because once I was like you. Alone. Broken. Someone showed me kindness, but I wasted it. I swore that if I ever had the chance again, I would not watch another life be destroyed." Amara's voice shook. "But what if I am not worth saving?" David stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then let me be wrong. But I will not abandon you." The words sank deep into her heart, planting roots she didn't know she could hold. From that day, something shifted between them. They began to talk more. Not long conversations, but pieces of themselves they offered slowly. Amara told him about her mother, about the nights she cried into her pillow, about the hunger for love that never came. David spoke of his scar, of betrayal, of how silence had become his only companion until she arrived. The more they shared, the lighter the silence became. It was no longer a wall, became a bridge. One evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and gold, David found Amara planting small flowers by the doorway. "Why flowers?" he asked. "Because they remind me that beauty can grow even from broken soil," she replied softly. David watched her hands in the earth, and for the first time in years, he felt hope stir in his chest. Yet, even as love began to bloom quietly between them, the world outside still waited with its doubts and whispers. And in the shadows of their hearts, fear lingered. Fear of loss, fear of trust, fear that happiness was too fragile to last. But for now, in that small house on the edge of Nairobi, two broken souls were learning to breathe again. And sometimes, breathing is the bravest beginning of all. The days rolled into weeks, and the house that once echoed with silence now carried soft laughter, careful words, and the scent of something new, belonging. Amara still sometimes woke in the night, startled by the old fear that her stepmother might appear to drag her back. But when she opened her eyes and saw the faint outline of David's wooden carvings, she reminded herself, "This is my home now. This is my life." Yet peace, Amara knew deep inside, is always a fragile guest. The annual harvest festival was coming. In Nairobi, it was more than celebration. It was a test of dignity. Families displayed their harvest. Women sang songs of thanksgiving. Men competed in games of strength. More importantly, it was the place where reputations were either built or broken. David had not attended for years. His scar, his silence, and the whispers of betrayal had driven him into the shadows. But this time, the village elders came to his home. "You cannot hide forever," one elder said. "The land has blessed us all, and you must stand with your people. Bring the girl too. Let her be seen." Amara's heart pounded at the thought. She imagined faces turning, voices whispering, Ruth's sharp eyes cutting her down in front of everyone. But David placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "If we hide, the lies win," he said softly. "You are not shame, Amara. You are strength." It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to her. On the morning of the festival, Amara wore a simple dress of blue cotton. She braided her hair carefully, her hands trembling. David, in a clean white shirt, looked almost regal despite the scar that curved across his cheek. When they walked into the square, heads turned. Conversations faltered. The whispers rose like smoke. "Is that her? The girl he took in? They say she was nothing but a servant. Or worse, a burden." Amara's stomach knotted, but David's hand on her arm was steady, grounding her. Together they walked to the center, where families displayed their harvests. When it was David's turn, he placed not grains or vegetables before the elders, but a carved wooden figure. Two birds, wings touching, carved so delicately that the crowd gasped. "This," he said, his deep voice carrying farther than Amara thought possible, "is what I harvested this year. Not from the soil but from my soul. I had lived in silence. Now I live with song." The elders nodded. The crowd shifted, some scoffing, others moved. And Amara, standing by his side, felt pride bloom in her chest like a flower opening to sunlight. But no victory comes without challenge. Later that afternoon, as drums beat and dancers filled the square, Ruth appeared. Her face was drawn, her clothes worn thin, but her voice carried sharp as ever. She pushed through the crowd until she stood before Amara. "So here you are," Ruth spat, "parading yourself as if you belong. You think a man's house makes you a woman of worth. You're nothing. You were always nothing." The crowd stilled. All eyes turned to Amara. The whispers swelled, waiting for her to break, to bow her head, to accept the label Ruth had carved into her since childhood. Amara's lips trembled. For a moment the old fear rose. She saw her mother's face, saw the nights of hunger, the endless chores, the loneliness. The words "you are nothing" echoed in her ears. But then she felt David's presence beside her. Not pushing, not shielding, simply there. Strong, steady, silent, but not the silence of neglect. The silence of support. Amara lifted her chin. Her voice, though shaking, rang out clear. "You called me nothing because you feared my strength. You made me small so you could stand taller. But I am not small anymore. I am not your shadow. I am Amara, and I belong to myself." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the drummer's hands paused mid-beat. Ruth's face twisted with rage, but something in her eyes flickered. Fear or perhaps shame. She turned sharply and disappeared into the crowd, her muttering lost in the noise of celebration returning. For the first time in her life, Amara felt taller than her stepmother. That night, after the festival, David and Amara sat outside the house beneath the stars. The wooden bird he had carved still rested in her hands. "You spoke with courage," David said quietly. "More courage than I have ever known." Amara turned to him, her eyes shining. "I only spoke what you taught me, that I am not shame, that I can be strength." Silence stretched between them again, but this silence was no longer heavy. It was full-charged, alive. Amara's heart raced. She wanted to thank him, not just with words but with the truth she carried deep inside. Yet fear held her tongue. What if he did not feel the same? What if she was only ever meant to be under his protection, not in his heart? But then David spoke, his voice low. "When I found you, I thought I was giving you a chance to live. But somewhere along the way you gave me one. You made me believe again. Amara, you have become my song." Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, not of pain this time, but of something she had longed for and never dared to imagine, love. "I was broken," she whispered. "But with you I feel whole." The stars above bore witness as two hearts, once buried in silence and sorrow, found their voice at last. Yet love, like faith, must be tested. Months later, a fire swept through part of the village. Houses were lost, fields destroyed, families displaced. David's house survived, but many neighbors had nowhere to go. Without hesitation, David opened his doors, offering shelter to those in need. Amara cooked for more mouths than she could count, washed clothes until her hands blistered, and comforted crying children at night. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she pushed through, determined to reflect the same kindness she had once received. One evening, as she carried water, a woman sneered at her. "You play the wife, but you are not his wife. You think kindness will change that. In the end, you are still an orphan girl someone else pitied." The words stung, reopening old wounds. That night, Amara wept quietly, afraid the woman was right. But David noticed. He knelt beside her, lifted her chin, and said firmly, "Do not let their poison enter you. You are not pity. You are choice. My choice." The weight of those words sank deep. And in that moment Amara knew. Their love, fragile as it sometimes felt, was real. When the village finally recovered, the elders came again to David. "You have given much," they said. "It is time you took something for yourself. Take this girl and make her your wife. Let your silence and her voice become one." Amara's heart pounded as David turned to her. His eyes, scarred by years of pain but softened by love, searched hers. "I will not decide for you," he said. "Amara, do you wish this?" Tears filled her eyes. She remembered the wooden bird, the fever, the festival, Ruth's cruel words, and the steady hand that had guided her through it all. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I choose this. I choose you." The wedding was simple, held under the wide sky with neighbors gathered. There was no gold, no grandeur, only laughter, songs, and the rhythm of drums. David, once the man of silence, stood tall with Amara beside him, her voice rising in a song that carried across the fields. And in that song was the story of two broken souls who had found not just each other, but themselves. Years later, children's laughter filled the house. The walls that had once been heavy with silence now echoed with stories, songs, and the patter of little feet. Amara told her children of a time when she believed she was nothing, and of the man who helped her see she was everything. And David, with silver streaking his hair, sat carving another wooden bird, smiling quietly as the sound of life filled the air. The scar on his face remained, but it no longer spoke of pain. It spoke of survival, of healing, of love. Together they had built more than a home. They had built a place of belonging, a place where silence and song lived side by side.